The Buccaneers are back in the win column after beating the Cardinals. That and more on today's episode of Locked On Bucs.
You are Locked On Buccaneers, your daily Tampa Bay Buccaneers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, and welcome into this episode of Locked On Bucs, your daily podcast covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, now the #1 sports podcast network. I want to thank you for making Locked On Bucs your first listener view every day. Don't forget you can subscribe or follow for free on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, you can follow along on Twitter. I am James Yarcho at JYarcho_Bucs, credentialed member of the media covering the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, here with you every Monday through Friday, along with the everydayers. And for that, I want to share my appreciation for your continued support of the show. One of the ways you can support the show is become a Locked On Bucs insider. You're going to get news, rumors, updates, general thoughts, one-on-one conversations with me via text message. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes to become an insider today. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Biggest takeaways and game balls coming up in a little bit. Man, it's been a long time since we had game balls to pass out, but we're going to get into that a little bit later. We're going to start this one off with the biggest moment. And for that, I'm going to go back to the second quarter in this game when we hit the 2-minute warning. The Bucs were facing a 4th and 2 from the 14-yard line, and instead of settling for a field goal and just a 6-0 lead, Todd Bowles opted to go for it. They throw the ball to Sterling Shepard. He gets the first down. Bucs keep the ball, though they're able to work the clock a little bit more, but from there, Bucky gets down to the 1, then scores a touchdown, but it's taken away because of a holding call. Baker then gets it to Rashad to get the penalty yardage back, and then finds Tristan Wirfs. Yes, Tristan Wirfs for a wide open touchdown. That was Wirfs' first touchdown, according to Greg Allman, since getting a pick 6 in high school. It was a perfectly designed play. It was a perfectly timed play call, and it gave the Bucs a 10-0 lead. Now, the Cardinals were able to answer and march down the field in a hurry to get a field goal before half, but going for it on that 4th down proved to be crucial with the way the rest of the game played out. As I said it, to the insiders when they hit the 2-minute warning, I wanted the Bucs to go for it because the offense was clicking on that drive. I had the confidence that they would convert, and they desperately needed a touchdown there instead of settling for a field goal, considering they already had a touchdown taken away for a bogus offensive pass interference call against Tez Johnson. The officiating was pretty bad in this game, but the Bucs were able to overcome a really bad call on that drive to still come away with that touchdown. As I mentioned, they needed it. You lose those 4 points there, and you could wind up losing that game. Now, that's not a guarantee, because if you're playing from behind, you're making different calls, you're approaching the game differently, but that defense was very different between the first and second halves. I'm gonna dive more into the defense coming up in a little bit. But the other thing that was so big was, about that particular call was the aggressive mindset of Todd Bowles in that moment. He has caught a lot of flack over the course of the last couple of weeks, basically since coming out of the bye, for some of his 4th down decisions. That was an automatic 3 points, but he had a good feel for the way that the game was going and the way that the offense was clicking, and they were really close to blowing things open earlier. So in that moment, Bowles had the right feel and the right call for the way that the game was playing out. You had a bad drop by Ibuka on what would have been a 3rd down conversion. You had a bad drop by Godwin in the end zone. You wound up settling for a field goal in that situation instead of going for it on 4th and goal. But the offense seemed to be in complete control throughout the first half. It was just a case of them beating themselves, not necessarily anything that the Cardinals were really doing to stop them. You had Godwin outside of that drop really looking like himself again. He had a couple of explosive plays, finished as the team's leading receiver with 78 yards on 3 catches. Bucky looked like Bucky. Leading rusher with 61 yards, just over 3.5 a carry. plus another 20 yards receiving. I'll dive more into the offense during the takeaways, but this was starting to show signs of what the offense is capable of and signs of what the offense is going to look like moving forward. There were just too many moments where they shot themselves in the foot. Penalties negating big plays and scores, and say what you will. Some of the calls were bad. Some of the calls were the right ones. The holding on Payne Durham on Bucky's 1-yard touchdown run, that was the right call. It was a bad play by Payne Durham. He got caught holding. You have to take that away from him. You had dropped passes. You had a couple of risky throws by Baker against a very opportunistic defense that he got away with. He was lucky he didn't turn the ball over a couple of times in this game. But overall, I thought there was a lot of good in this game, especially on the offensive side of the ball, that they could really start to build on. It wasn't perfect by any means, but the biggest takeaway that you need to have here, and I'll get to mine, but the biggest takeaway that you need to have here is that, a win is a win. And the Bucs have been desperate for a win, and to win a close game like this with a defensive stop, I think was huge moving forward. There was not a lot of confidence that the defense could get the job done with the way they played the second half, but they finished the game. They prevented Arizona from putting together a 2-minute drill to tie or win the game. Baker even said after the game that he felt like the offense was very close to returning to form. And I agree wholeheartedly. We are talking about 1 or 2 plays in each half that could have made this a 3-score win instead of a 1-score win. But considering they got blown out last week in the fashion in which they did, they lost 2 close games coming out of the bye before that. This is a big step in the right direction that they needed in order to get themselves back into a groove and build on this moving forward. I will take an ugly win over a pretty loss any day of the week. This is a team that had lost 3 in a row. They had lost 4 of their last 5. I didn't care how they got the job done as long as they got the job done. There was enough good to be excited about with the potential, but there was enough bad to still have some reservations, still have some concerns, and hope that those things start to get cleaned up. Want to jump into the chat real quick to see what some of you are saying. Florida Dream House, my guy Paul, Evans and J-Mac back in 1 to 2 weeks, and then we can get down. I'll talk more about Jalen McMillan on this show. We got Johnny. Bucky was happy to be out there. Bucky was elated. And it was so nice to see that kind of energy and that kind of attitude from him because he was finally back. And he looked like Bucky. And that was another really encouraging thing. We got Lakita. I'm encouraged by the win and the positive return of Bucky, but I can agree. We have to get way better if we are going anywhere. Absolutely. And I have seen a lot of you talking about the Panthers beating the Rams in the live chat. I wasn't planning on addressing this, but I think I will. I had that game on while I had the Buccaneers game on, so I was glancing over as often as possible and trying to track that game and follow. And here's kind of my big takeaway before I go back and watch that game in its entirety. That game was more about the Rams losing than it was about Carolina winning. Now, Carolina played a great game. They did everything that they needed to do in order to win. They won the turnover battle 3-0. Stafford set the record for consecutive touchdown passes without an interception, then immediately throws 2 interceptions, one of which gets returned for a touchdown. The Panthers defense stepped up and got a fumble in a crucial moment at the end of the game. But let's not overreact to this. The Panthers played a great game against a team that was coming off of a huge win against the Bucs Sunday night and then flew across the country. This is still the same Panthers team that lost to the Saints just a couple of weeks ago. The Panthers are a good football team. I picked them to finish second in this division before the season started. I believed in what we saw late in the year with Canales and Bryce Young last year. Teteroa McMillan is starting to find a groove. They have a great running back duo, but they're not world beaters. I'm not overly scared about that potential matchup, and this is a Buccaneers team that controls their own destiny. I mentioned it in the chat before the show started. The Bucs, Here's the scenario that you need. Win your next three. Win your next three games. Beat the Saints, beat the Falcons, beat the Panthers, and those three wins right there, you clinch the NFC South. You don't have to wait until you face the Panthers in the final week of the season. You clinch if you win your next three games. The Bucs are more than capable of doing exactly that. All right. What are the biggest takeaways from this one? That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. World Cup is coming back to North America for the first time since 1994, and with 48 teams for the first time ever, it's going to be massive. But let's be honest, getting tickets is usually the hardest part. That's why the Game Time app is clutch, finally giving fans a real advantage when it comes to snagging seats. With Game Time, you can track price drops in real time, get alerts when great seats open, and buy tickets the moment they hit the app. It puts the power back in your hands and makes going to the World Cup realistic instead of impossible. Pick a game, tap a section, and have your tickets locked within minutes. No confusion, no hunting for fine print. Prices include fees up front, which I love, so there's no last-second surprises at checkout. It keeps every single bit of the ticket buying experience easy, and that's what we want. Take the guesswork out of buying World Cup tickets and every match, concert, or event with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, download the app, make an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off. Swipe, tap, ticket, go. Game Time. Thank you again for making Locked On Bucs your first listen review every day. And thank you for making Locked On the #1 sports podcast network. I did see someone in the chat, Mr. King. James is known as the super optimist. You know, in situations like this, I look for the good, right? We know that I can be critical of this team. I can be critical of players, but a lot of people were frustrated that, the Bucs should have won by more. The Bucs should have done this. They should have done that. They got the win. That was the first step. Chris Godwin said it in his media availability in the locker room after the game. The first step was getting the win. That was their #1 goal. Didn't matter how they do it. They did it, period. So, I am usually optimistic, but I picked them to lose against the Bills and against the Rams. I picked them to win this game. I've been critical of some of the decisions, but this is where we are right now, and I'm going to give you my biggest takeaways. Let's start on the offensive side of the ball. Here's more optimism for you, and talk about how I think that the best is yet to come. I mentioned it earlier. I felt like this team was just a couple of self-inflicted wounds away from really blowing this game open. 7 for 16 on third down is not going to cut it. But you go back to some of the drops they had, couple of questionable decisions like the deep shot to Sterling Shepard on a third down. Although I do think in that situation, I had a longtime listener text me about that and say, I don't like that play call. I don't like Baker going deep in that situation. And I think when Baker rolled out to the right, he cut off half of the field. He could have hit Godwin for a first down had he stayed in the pocket, but that's that situation. You can't throw across your body all the way to the other side of the field and expect it to end in a positive manner. So that was more situational than I think the true play call. But, I think this one, one of the more encouraging signs, I should say, is how calm Baker looked when he was dropping back to pass. He didn't get happy feet in this one. He wasn't panicking in the pocket like Evan had mentioned earlier in the week. We had seen from him over the last couple of weeks. His timing wasn't off. Some of his passes were, but his timing was better. So now it's about cleaning up those little things, getting Baker's accuracy back to where it normally is. On top of all of that, more help is on the way. You got Bucky Irving and Ben Bredeson back on Sunday. Godwin came back last week. He started to look more confident and more like himself this week. And for those that didn't see it, Jalen McMillan was cleared by his spinal specialist, and he is expected to begin practicing this week. It's going to take a little bit, so don't expect him to play next Sunday against the Saints or anything like that. But this is another level that is about to be added to the offense that the Bucs have not had all season long. Not too far behind him is going to be Mike Evans. So they're getting all of these key players back slowly and staggered, but with enough time for the offense to find their groove, find that rhythm before the postseason begins. That is massive news. I'm nervous for McMillan, of course, just because of the nature of the injury that he had, but you have to trust the spinal specialist that cleared him, to allow him to start working himself into football shape to get out there with Ibuka and Godwin. You still have Tez as a threat from anywhere on the field. This Buccaneers passing attack is about to become even more dangerous. Then you have Bucky getting more opportunities as the weeks progress because he wasn't going to get that full slate right out of the, in his initial return. Bucky getting back to 60, 65, 70% of snaps, that makes the offense even more dangerous. We're really going to see Baker and this crew start to take shape over the month of December, and then hopefully they're hitting their stride by the end of the month, by the beginning of the new year, as the postseason is about to begin. Very, very encouraged by what we saw overall on offense, because again, these mistakes can be cleaned up. These aren't fundamental issues. These are little mental mistakes that were made that you can get fixed. As for the defense, it was encouraging until it wasn't. Antoine got a huge interception on the Cardinals opening drive. Then the defense forced back-to-back 3-and-outs before the field goal drive at the end of the half. Then they opened the second half with the kick coverage being terrible. The Cardinals starting with great field position. Bam Knight clips off, a 12-yard run, but then the defense forces a fumble. Things after that started to fall apart. You had a 10-play, 65-yard drive that ended with a missed field goal, 6-play, 72-yard drive that ended with a touchdown, 9-play, 73-yard drive that ended with a touchdown. Thankfully, they forced a 4-and-out on that final possession, but for as good as the defense looked in the first half, they looked that bad in the second half. Now, forcing 2 turnovers, great, fantastic. Offense kind of fumbled the bag there by getting 0 points off of those takeaways, but the defense still killed those drives. Brissett was sacked twice. Is it just me, or did it feel like Brissett got sacked a lot more than just 2 times? Either way, 2 sacks is good. Pressure was good. The pass rush looked completely different with Hassan Reddick on the field, and it really forced Brissett into some bad spots, especially in the first half of the game. All that said, there are some serious concerns. Zion McCollum is getting abused. Absolutely abused. Brissett attacked him consistently all day long, regardless of who he was covering. McCollum started the game on Harrison Jr., and Harrison Jr. gets 2 quick targets that gets them a first down and gets that drive started. Michael Wilson had no targets or 1 target throughout the entire game. He's been absolutely on a tear recently. McCollum switches over to Michael Wilson, and boom, Brissett starts looking that way, and Michael Wilson starts pulling down some receptions. McCollum is not playing anywhere close to the level that he was last year that got him his big money extension before the season. That cannot continue. You are relying on this guy to shut down top receiving options like he did in 2024, and it just flat out is not happening. I know Benjamin Morrison is hurt right now, and he's had his growing pains. He's had some struggles since coming out of the bye, but you could make an argument that Morrison has had more positive performances this season than Zion McCollum has. Teams can't attack Jamel Dean because he's at least a Pro Bowler, maybe even an All-Pro this season. So McCollum is getting shredded, and it's making things too easy on opposing offenses to put together these long drives, convert third downs, and score touchdowns. We all would have said before the season started that if Jamel Dean was out there holding quarterbacks to below a 25 passer rating when targeted this year, that the Bucs would have had the best pass defense in the NFL, because we all would have assumed that Zion was locking things down on his side. That is far from the case. Now, I'm going to do a deeper dive into the numbers on McCollum tomorrow when all of that information is available. That I don't have everything that I need to put together the type of presentation that I want to and give you guys as much information as possible. But, it's not pretty. And it would not surprise me in the slightest if McCollum is the 4th rated corner on this team right now. That has to be fixed. It absolutely has to. Otherwise, that's going to be a big reason that you don't compete in some of these games down the stretch the way that you should, or you end up getting bounced in the first round of the playoffs. Frank in the chat says Bucs need CD3 and Sean Murphy Bunting. No, they don't. I'll nip that in the bud right now. Carlton Davis he's still Carlton Davis. He misses half the season. When he's in, half the time he looks good, half the time he's a liability. Sean Murphy Bunting, I don't even know what he's doing right now. He basically completely fell off after he went to the Arizona Cardinals. All right, we are handing out game balls. That is coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Bucs. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. The holiday season is one of the best times for sports, bowl games, big basketball matchups, playoff pushes. It's all happening at once. And while we're all making choices every day, one of the most fun places to make the right call is Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the easiest way to get in on daily fantasy. Just pick more or less on at least 2 player projections, lock in your lineup, and you're in the game. It's simple, fast, and available in 45 states. Creating a lineup takes less than a minute, and the app makes the entire process smooth and intuitive. And the new Stacks feature lets you choose the same player up to 3 times in one lineup, like more on Baker Mayfield's passing yards, touchdowns, and rushing yards. Download the Prize Picks app today and use code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks, it's good to be right. Wrapping things up here on this live post-game reaction episode of Locked On Bucs, and it is time to pass out game balls. Start dropping yours in the chat, and I know it's been a while, so a little reminder of how this goes since we haven't done game balls in over a month. I tend to pick 2 players from each side of the ball. It doesn't always work out that way, spoiler alert. But our first game ball is always the golden game ball and the overall player of the game. I already see Fausto in the chat giving a game ball to somebody that I didn't. We'll get to that in just a minute. Game ball number 1, our golden game ball, Bucky Irving. 81 all-purpose yards on 19 touches and gets his first rushing touchdown of the season. We talked about it a little bit, at the top of the show, but it was just great to see him out there. It was great to see him out there with the smile on his face, with the energy, with the excitement to be back with the team and playing the way that really he normally does. He didn't appear rusty. He didn't appear slower or, not in game shape or anything like that. He was a huge reason the Bucs won this game. And since no one really had those eye-popping numbers, I wanted to give him some flowers here because we have been waiting for his return for 7 weeks. You could tell how excited he was. You could tell how much this game meant to him, how much it meant to him to be back on a football field, to be back with his teammates, and be back doing what he loves. We are all thrilled to have Bucky back. I love it. Game ball number 2, we're going to Antoine Himfield Jr. Huge interception on Arizona's opening drive. It was kicked off by Jamel Dean because Jamel Dean did Jamel Dean things, and the ball hit him right in the chest, and he didn't secure it. It went straight up in the air. Where did those hands go, Jamel? You have a career high in interceptions in a season. You should have brought that one down, but Antoine was Johnny on the spot and was able to pull it down. Then he had a couple of big tackles. He had a pass breakup. He got to Jacoby Brissett. Overall, he had the kind of game that he needed to in order to help the Bucs win. And I go back to the tackle that he had. I believe it was against Michael Carter. Could have been Bam Knight, but it was earlier in the game. And there was a run play that the Cardinals called. And if it wasn't for Antoine being there and closing in on that gap, that was going to be another 40-plus yard touchdown that the defense gave up. Really solid game from him. Game ball number 3 goes to Chris Godwin. Jenna Lane was the first one that I saw mention it, but I did see other media members echo the sentiment. Godwin needed this game. He had 2 huge plays, and while he had that drop in the end zone, there were people saying, again, Jenna Lane was the first one to mention it, but media members were saying you could see almost a relieved look on Godwin's face, like there was a huge weight lifted off of his shoulders, and that he is really starting to play like his old self again, and he understands that. He realizes that. 1 catch for 31 yards that set up a first and goal. He had a gain of 25 on a 3rd and 9 on the opening drive, 22-yard catch to get into the red zone. That ended up leading to Bucky Irving's touchdown. So 3 explosives from number 14. He is real close to blowing up a big confidence boosting kind of game there for Godwin. Game ball number 4, Chase McLaughlin. I know I'm supposed to go defense here, but let's give Illinois legend Chase McLaughlin some love. 9 for 9 from 50-plus yards this season. That's the most 50-plus yard field goals by a Bucs kicker in a single season in franchise history, and he leads the NFL in 50-plus yard field goals this year. He is 24 of 27 from 50-plus since he signed with Tampa. He's an absolute weapon. And while we all want to see these drives end in touchdowns, it's really nice to have the confidence that the Bucs have a kicker that can go out there and make those kinds of kicks once you get inside an opponent's 45-yard line. Kickers are people too, guys. And this one deserves some attention, especially after the way the season started for him. And many of us still having the memories of all the kickers that this team went throughout the 2010s that couldn't make anything. So wanted to give Chase some love here, and he gets game ball number 4. All right, let's see who your guys' game balls are going to. Jordan gave a game ball to Chase McLaughlin and says underrated. I love that. Steven gives one to Bucky. Lakita gives one to Antoine. Paul, he gives game balls to Tristan, Bucky, and Godwin. Fausto gives him to Worse and Antoine Winfield Jr. Steven gives one to Tyke Smith. Tyke Smith, man, I could probably do an entire episode just about the difference between Tyke Smith as a rookie playing that slot corner position to where he is now as a safety. He has been absolutely amazing. Anybody else's heart kind of sink when the announcing crew said that Tyke Smith was down on the field. Now he walked off under his own power and came back, but I mean, I just had this overwhelming sense of dread of please not Tyke, not right now, not when this team is finally getting all of these key players back. They cannot lose another one. Tyke Smith has been absolutely amazing this year. Amazement says Tyke MVP on the defense. I agree. 100%. Tyke has been the MVP for the defense, maybe even the MVP for the team as a whole. We'll give out postseason awards when everything is said and done, but destined for greatness. Golden ball goes to Bucky. Then he gives game balls to Tristan Wirfs, Antoine Winfield Jr., and Chase McLaughlin. I love that. Let's see. Richard says honorable mention Chase McLaughlin with another 50-yarder. Let's see. Paul, honorable mention to Yaya for playing hard and getting a sack. That sack was outstanding. That was a long play. Yaya never gave up on it either. We talked on the squad show, or I'm sorry, Jaron mentioned it on the squad show after the Rams game, that he saw a lot of times when, the opposing offense was starting to move the ball down the field, or a Bucs player was somewhat out of the play, they would throw their arms up and try to draw a holding call, or they wouldn't hustle to wherever the ball was. That was a hustle play by Yaya Diaby that resulted in a sack. That was absolutely fantastic. And then Amazement also gives an honorable mention or an honorable game ball to Servassier Dennis. He did have the key pass breakup on 4th and 2 to seal this game, which was interesting because you go back and Voss was pulled off the field for Deion Jones there for one of the drives. So it was nice to see him make a big play when he came back onto the field. All right, guys, that is going to do it for this episode. Please check out everything going on Twitter at Locked On Bucs, at @JYarcho_Bucs, Instagram and TikTok at Locked On Bucs, both of those places. Subscribe on YouTube with the notifications turned on, as well as wherever you get your podcasts. Become a Locked On Bucs insider. Go to joinsubtext.com/LockedOnBucs or click the link in the show notes. If you want to support the show, but you don't want to be an insider, it's real easy. Like this episode on YouTube, leave a 5-star review wherever you get podcasts. It does help other Buccaneers fans find the show. Hope you all have an absolutely outstanding Victory Monday. Stay safe, stay healthy, fire the cannons. I want to thank you so much for joining me right here on Locked On Bucs, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.